The Concentration City by J.G. Ballard. Noon talk on Millionth Street. Sorry, these are the West Millions. You want 9,775,335th East. $5 a cubic foot. Sell. Take a westbound express to 495th Avenue. Cross over to a red line elevator and go up 1,000 levels to Plaza Terminal. Carry on south from there and you'll find it between 568th Avenue and 422nd Street. There's a cave-in down at Ken County, 50 blocks by 20 by 30 levels. Listen to this. Pyro stage mass breakout. Fire police cordon Bay County. It's a beautiful counter. Detects up to 0.005% monoxide. Cost me $300. Have you seen those new intercity sleepers? Takes only 10 minutes to go up 3,000 levels. 90 cents a foot? Bye. You say the idea came to you in a dream? The voice jabbed out. You're sure no one else gave it to you? No, M said flatly. A couple feet away from him, a spot lamp threw a cone of dirty yellow light into his face. He dropped his eyes from the glare and waited as the sergeant paced over to his desk, tapped his fingers on the edge, and swung around on him again. You talked it over with your friends? Only the first theory, M explained quietly, about the possibility of flight. But you told me the other theory was more important. Why keep it quiet from them? M hesitated. Outside somewhere, a trolley shunted and clanged along the elevated. I was afraid they wouldn't understand what I meant. The sergeant laughed sourly. You mean they would have thought you really were crazy? M shifted uncomfortably on the stool. Its seat was only 6 inches off the floor, and his thighs and lumbar muscles felt like slabs of inflamed rubber. After 3 hours of cross-questioning, logic had faded, and he groped helplessly. The concept was a little abstract. There weren't any words for it. The sergeant snorted. I'm glad to hear you say it. He sat down on the desk, watched M for a moment, and then went over to him. Now look, he said confidentially, it's getting late. Do you still think both theories are reasonable? M looked up. Aren't they? The sergeant turned angrily to the man watching in the shadows by the window. We're wasting our time, he snapped. I'll hand him over to Psycho. You've seen enough, haven't you, Doc? The surgeon stared thoughtfully at his hands. He was a tall, heavy-shouldered man, built like a wrestler, with thick, coarsely lined features. He ambled forward, knocking back one of the chairs with his knee. There's something I want to check, he said curtly. Leave me alone with him for half an hour. The sergeant shrugged. All right, he said, going over to the door, but be careful with him. When the sergeant had gone, the surgeon sat down behind the desk and stared vacantly out of the window, listening to the dull hum of air through the huge 90-foot ventilator shaft which rose out of the street below the station. A few roof lights were still burning, and 200 yards away, a single policeman slowly patrolled the iron catwalk running above the street, his boots ringing across the darkness. M sat on the stool, elbows between his knees, trying to edge a little life back into his legs. Eventually, the surgeon glanced down at the charge sheet. Name, Franz M. Age, 20. Occupation, student. Address, 3599719 West 783rd Street. Level, 549-770M-45 KNI, local. Charge, vagrancy. Tell me about this dream, he said slowly, idly flexing a steel rule between his hands as he looked across at M. I think you've heard everything, sir, M said. In detail. M shifted uneasily. There wasn't much to it. What I do remember isn't so clear now. The surgeon yawned. M waited and then started to recite what he had already repeated 20 times. I was suspended in the air above a flat stretch of open ground, something like the floor of an enormous arena. My arms were out at my sides, and I was looking down, floating. Hold on, the surgeon interrupted. Are you sure you weren't swimming? No, M said. I'm certain I wasn't. All around me, there was free space. That was the most important part about it. There were no walls, nothing but emptiness. That's all I remember. The surgeon ran his finger along the edge of the rule. Go on. Well, the dream gave me the idea of building a flying machine. One of my friends helped me construct it. The surgeon nodded. Almost absently, he picked up the charge sheet, crushed it with a single motion of his hand, and flicked it into the wastebasket. Don't be crazy, Franz, Gregson remonstrated. They took their places in the chemistry cafeteria queue. It's against the laws of hydrodynamics. Where would you get your buoyancy? Suppose you had a rigid fabric vane, Franz explained as they shuffled past the hatchways, say 10 feet across, like one of those composition wall sections, with hand grips on the ventral surface. And then you jump down from the gallery at the Coliseum Stadium. What would happen? You'd make a hole in the floor. Why? No, seriously. If it was large enough and held together, you'd swoop down like a paper dart. Glide, Franz said. Right. 30 levels above them, one of the intercity expresses roared over, rattling the tables and cutlery in the cafeteria. Franz waited until they reached the table and sat forward, his food forgotten. And say you attached a propulsive unit, such as a battery-driven ventilator fan, or one of those rockets they use on the sleepers, with enough thrust to overcome your weight. What then? Gregson shrugged. If you could control the thing, you'd... He frowned at Franz. What's the word? You're always using it. Fly. Basically, Matheson, the machine is simple, Sanger, the physics lecturer, commented as they entered the science library. An elementary application of the Venturi principle. But what's the point of it? A trapeze would serve its purpose equally well and be far less dangerous. In the first place, consider the enormous clearances it would require. I hardly think the traffic authorities will look upon it with any favor. I know it wouldn't be practicable here, Franz admitted, but in a large open area, it should be. Allowed. I suggest you immediately negotiate with the Arena Garden on level 347-25. The lecturer said whimsically. I'm sure they'll be glad to hear about your scheme. Franz smiled politely. That wouldn't be large enough. I was really thinking of an area of totally free space, in 3 dimensions, as it were. Sanger looked at Franz curiously. Free space? Isn't that a contradiction in terms? Space is $1 a cubic foot. He scratched his nose. Have you begun to construct this machine yet? No, Franz said. In that event, I should try to forget all about it. Remember, Matheson, the task of science is to consolidate existing knowledge, to systematize and reinterpret the discoveries of the past, not to chase wild dreams into the future. He nodded and disappeared amongst the dusty shelves. Gregson was waiting on the steps. Well, he asked. Let's try it out this afternoon, Franz said. We'll cut Text 5 Pharmacology. I know those Fleming readings backwards. I'll ask Dr. McGee for a couple of passes. They left the library and walked down the narrow, dimly lit alley which ran behind the huge, new civil engineering laboratories. Over 75% of the student enrollment was in the architectural and engineering faculties, a meager 2% in pure sciences. Consequently, the physics and chemistry libraries were housed in the oldest quarter of the university, in 2 virtually condemned galvanized hutments which once contained the now closed philosophy school. At the end of the alley, they entered the University Plaza and started to climb the iron stairway leading to the next level, 100 feet up. Halfway up, a white-helmeted FP checked them cursorily with his detector and waved them past. What did Sanger think? Gregson asked as they stepped up into 637th Street and walked across to the suburban elevator station. He's no use at all, Franz said. He didn't even begin to understand what I was talking about. Gregson laughed ruefully. I don't know whether I do. Franz took a ticket from the automat and mounted the down platform. An elevator dropped slowly toward him, its bell jangling. Wait until this afternoon, he called back. You're really going to see something. The floor manager at the Coliseum initialed the two passes. Students, eh? All right. He jerked a thumb at the long package Franz and Gregson were carrying. What have you got there? It's a device for measuring air velocities, Franz told him. The manager grunted and released the style. Out in the center of the empty arena, Franz undid the package, and they assembled the model. It had a broad, fan-like wing of wire and paper, a narrow, strutted fuselage, and a high, curving tail. Franz picked it up and launched it into the air. The model glided for 20 feet and then slithered to a stop across the sawdust. Seems to be stable, Franz said. We'll tow it first. He pulled a reel of twine from his pocket and tied one end to the nose. As they ran forward, the model lifted gracefully into the air and followed them around the stadium, 10 feet off the floor. Let's try the rockets now, Franz said. He adjusted the wing and tail settings and fitted 3 firework display rockets into a wire bracket mounted above the wing. The stadium was 400 feet in diameter and had a roof 250 high. They carried the model over to one side, and Franz lit the tapers. There was a burst of flame, and the model accelerated off across the floor, 2 feet in the air, a bright trail of colored smoke spitting out behind it. Its wings rocked gently from side to side. Suddenly, the tail burst into flames. The model lifted steeply and looped up toward the roof, stalled just before it hit one of the pilot lights, and dived down into the sawdust. They ran across to it and stamped out the glowing cinders. Franz, Gregson shouted, it's incredible. It actually works. Franz kicked the shattered fuselage. Of course it works, he said impatiently, walking away. But as Sanger said, what's the point of it? The point, it flies. Isn't that enough? No, I want one big enough to hold me. Franz, slow down. Be reasonable. Where could you fly it? I don't know, Franz said fiercely, but there must be somewhere. The floor manager and 2 assistants carrying fire extinguishers ran across the stadium to them. Did you hide that match? Franz asked quickly. They'll lynch us if they think we're pyros. 3 afternoons later, Franz took the elevator up 150 levels to 677-98, where the precinct estate office had its bureau. There's a big development between 493 and 554 in the next sector, one of the clerks told him. I don't know whether that's any good to you. 60 blocks by 20 by 15 levels. Nothing bigger? Franz queried. The clerk looked up. Bigger? No, what are you looking for? A slight case of agoraphobia? Franz straightened the map spread across the counter. I wanted to find an area of more or less continuous development, 200 or 300 blocks long. The clerk shook his head and went back to his ledger. Didn't you go to engineering school? He asked scornfully. The city won't take it. 100 blocks is the maximum. Franz thanked him and left. A southbound express took him to the development in 2 hours. He left the car at the detour point and walked the 300 yards to the end of the level. The street, a seedy but busy thoroughfare of garment shops and small business premises, running through the huge 10-mile thick BIR industrial cube, ended abruptly in a tangle of ripped girders and concrete. A steel rail had been erected along the edge, and Franz looked down over it into the cavity, 3 miles long, a mile wide, and 1,200 feet deep, which thousands of engineers and demolition workers were tearing out of the matrix of the city. 800 feet below him, unending lines of trucks and rail cars carried away the rubble and debris, and clouds of dust swirled up into the arc lights blazing down from the roof. As he watched, a chain of explosions ripped along the wall on his left, and the whole face suddenly slipped and fell slowly toward the floor, revealing a perfect cross-section through 15 levels of the city. Franz had seen big developments before, and his own parents had died in the historic QUA County cave-in 10 years earlier, when 3 master pillars had sheared and 200 levels of the city had abruptly sunk 10,000 feet, squashing 500,000 people like flies in a concertina. But the enormous gulf of emptiness still made his imagination gape. All around him, standing and sitting on the jutted terraces of girders, a silent throng stared down. "They say they're going to build gardens and parks for us," an elderly man at Franz's elbow remarked in a slow, patient voice. "I even heard they might be able to get a tree. It'll be the only tree in the whole county." A man in a frayed sweatshirt spat over the rail. "That's what they always say. At $1 a foot, promises are all they can waste space on." Below them, a woman who had been looking out into the air started to simper nervously. 2 bystanders took her by the arms and tried to lead her away. The woman began to thresh about, and an FP came over and dragged her away roughly. "Poor fool," the man in the sweatshirt commented. "She probably lived out there somewhere. They gave her 90 cents a foot when they took it away from her. She doesn't know yet. She'll have to pay $1.10 to get it back. Now they're going to start charging 5 cents an hour just to sit up here and watch." Franz looked out over the railing for a couple of hours and then bought a postcard from one of the vendors and walked back thoughtfully to the elevator. He called in to see Gregson before returning to the student dormitory. The Gregsons lived up in the West Millions on 985th Avenue in a top 3-room flat right under the roof. Franz had known them since his parents' death, but Gregson's mother still regarded him with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion, and as she let him in with her customary smile of welcome, he noticed her glancing quickly at the detector mounted in the wall. Gregson was in his room, happily cutting out frames of paper and pasting them onto a great rickety construction that vaguely resembled Franz's model. "Hello, Franz. What was it like?" Franz struggled. "Just a development. Worth seeing." Gregson pointed to his construction. "Do you think we can try it out there?" "We could do." Franz sat down on the bed, picked up a paper dart lying beside him, and tossed it out of the window. It swam out into the street, lazed down in a wide spiral, and vanished into the open mouth of a ventilator shaft. "When are you going to build another model?" Gregson asked. "I'm not." Gregson swung around. "Why? You've proved your theory." "That's not what I'm after." "I don't get you, Franz. What are you after?" "Free space." "Free?" Gregson repeated. Franz nodded, in both senses. Gregson shook his head sadly and snipped out another paper panel. "Franz, you're crazy." Franz stood up. "Take this room," he said. "It's 20 feet by 15 by 10. Extend its dimensions infinitely. What do you find?" "A development." "Infinitely. Non-functional space." "Well?" Franz asked patiently. "The concept's absurd." "Why?" "Because it couldn't exist." Franz pounded his forehead in despair. Why couldn't it? Gregson gestured with the scissors. It's self-contradictory, like the statement, I am lying. Just a verbal freak. Interesting theoretically, but it's pointless to press it for meaning. He tossed the scissors onto the table. And anyway, do you know how much free space would cost? Franz went over to the bookshelf and pulled out one of the volumes. Let's have a look at your street atlas. He turned to the index. This gives 1,000 levels. KNI County, 100,000 cubic miles. Population, 30 million. Gregson nodded. Franz closed the atlas. 250 counties, including KNI, together form the 493rd sector, and an association of 1,500 adjacent sectors comprise the 298th local union. He broke off and looked at Gregson. As a matter of interest, ever heard of it? Gregson shook his head. No. How did Franz slapped the atlas on the table? Roughly 4 by 10 to the 15th power cubic great miles. He leaned on the window edge. Now tell me, what lies beyond the 298th local union? Other unions, I suppose, Gregson said. I don't see your difficulty. And beyond those? Further ones. Why not? Forever? Franz pressed. Well, as far as forever is. The Great Street Directory in the old Treasury Library on 247th Street is the largest in the county, Franz said. I went down there this morning. It occupies 3 complete levels, millions of volumes, but it doesn't extend beyond the 598th local union. No one there had any idea what lay further out. Why not? Why should they? Gregor asked. Franz, what are you driving at? Franz walked across to the door. Come down to the Biohistory Museum. I'll show you. The birds perched on humps of rock or waddled about the sandy paths between the water pools. Archaeopteryx, Franz read off one of the cage indicators. The bird, lean and mildewed, uttered a painful croak when he fed a handful of beans to it. Some of these birds have the remnants of a pectoral girdle, Franz said, minute fragments of bone embedded in the tissues around their rib cages. Wings? Dr. McGee thinks so. They walked out between the lines of cages. When does he think they were flying? Before the Foundation, Franz said. 300 billion years ago. When they got outside the museum, they started down 859th Avenue. Halfway down the street, a dense crowd had gathered, and people were packed into the windows and balconies above the elevated, watching a squad of fire police break their way into a house. The bulkheads at either end of the block had been closed, and heavy steel traps sealed off the stairways from the levels above and below. The ventilator and exhaust shafts were silent, and already the air was stale and soupy. Pyros, Gregson murmured. We should have brought our masks. It's only a scare, Franz said. He pointed at the monoxide detectors, which were out everywhere, their long snouts sucking at the air. The dial needles stood safely at 0. Let's wait in the restaurant opposite. They edged their way over to the restaurant, sat down in the window, and ordered coffee. This, like everything else on the menu, was cold. All cooking appliances were thermostated to a maximum 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and only in the more expensive restaurants and hotels was it possible to obtain food that was at most tepid. Below them, in the street, a lot of shouting went up. The FPs seemed unable to penetrate beyond the ground floor of the house and had started to baton back the crowd. An electric winch was wheeled up and bolted to the girders running below the curb, and 6 heavy steel grabs were carried into the house and hooked around the walls. Gregson laughed. The owners are going to be surprised when they get home. Franz was watching the house. It was a narrow, shabby dwelling sandwiched between a large wholesale furniture store and a new supermarket. An old sign running across the front had been painted over, and evidently the ownership had recently changed. The present tenants had made a half-hearted attempt to convert the ground floor into a cheap stand-up diner. The FPs appeared to be doing their best to wreck everything, and pies and smashed crockery were strewn all over the pavement. "Crowd's pretty ugly," Franz said. "Do you want to move?" "Hold on." The noise died away, and everyone waited as the winch began to revolve. Slowly the hawsers wound in and tautened, and the front wall of the house bulged and staggered outward in rigid, jerky movements. Suddenly there was a yell from the crowd. Franz raised his arm. "Up there, look!" On the fourth floor, a man and woman had come to the window and were looking down frantically. The man helped the woman out onto the ledge, and she crawled out and clung to one of the waste pipes. The crowd roared, "Pyros! You bloody pyros!" Bottles were lobbed up at them and bounced down among the police. A wide crack split the house from top to bottom, and the floor on which the man was standing dropped and catapulted him backward out of sight. Then one of the lintels in the first floor snapped, and the entire house tipped over and collapsed. Franz and Gregson stood up involuntarily, almost knocking over the table. The crowd surged forward through the cordon. When the dust had settled, there was nothing left but a heap of masonry and twisted beams. Embedded in this was the battered figure of a man. Almost smothered by the dust, he moved slowly, painfully trying to free himself with one hand, and the crowd started roaring again as one of the grabs wound in and dragged him down under the rubble. The manager of the restaurant pushed past Franz and leaned out the window, his eyes fixed on the dial of a portable detector. Its needle, like all the others, pointed to 0. A dozen hoses were playing on the remains of the house, and after a couple minutes, the crowd shifted and began to thin out. The manager switched off the detector and left the window, nodding to Franz. "Damn pyros. You can relax now, boys." Franz pointed at the detector. "Your dial was dead. There wasn't a trace of monoxide anywhere here. How do you know they were pyros?" "Don't worry. We knew." He smiled obliquely. "We don't want that sort of element in this neighborhood." Franz shrugged and sat down. "I suppose that's one way of getting rid of them." The manager eyed Franz unpleasantly. "That's right, boy. This is a good $5 neighborhood." He smirked to himself. "Maybe a $6. Now everyone knows about our safety record." "Careful, Franz," Greg warned him when the manager had gone. "He may be right. Pyros do take over small cafes and food bars." Franz stirred his coffee. Dr. McGee estimates that at least 15% of the city's population are submerged pyros. He's convinced the number's growing and that eventually the whole city will flame out. He pushed away his coffee. "How much money have you got?" "On me?" "Altogether." "About $30. "I've saved up 15, Franz said thoughtfully. $45. That would be enough for 3 or 4 weeks. "Where?" Gregson asked. "On a super sleeper." "Super!" Gregson broke off, alarmed. 3 or 4 weeks? What do you mean?" "There's only one way to find out," Franz explained calmly. "I can't just sit here thinking. Somewhere there's free space, and I'll ride the sleeper until I find it. Will you lend me your $30? "But Franz, if I don't find anything within a couple of weeks, I'll change tracks and come back." "But the ticket will cost," Gregson searched, "billions. $45 won't even get you out of the sector." "That's just for coffee and sandwiches," Franz said. "The ticket will be free." He looked up from the table. "You know..." Gregson shook his head doubtfully. "Can you try that on the super sleepers?" "Why not? If they query it, I'll say I'm going back the long way around." "Greg, will you?" "I don't know if I should." Gregson played helplessly with his coffee. Franz, how can there be free space? How? That's what I'm going to find out, Franz said. Think of it as my first physics practical. Passenger distances on the transport system were measured point to point by the application of A equals the square root of B squared plus C squared plus D squared. The actual itinerary taken was the passenger's responsibility, and as long as he remained within the system, he could choose any route he liked. Tickets were checked only at the station exits, where necessary surcharges were collected by an inspector. If the passenger was unable to pay the surcharge, 10 cents a mile, he was sent back to his original destination. Franz and Gregson entered the station on 984th Street and went over to the large console where tickets were automatically dispensed. Franz put in a penny and pressed the destination button marked 984. The machine rumbled, coughed out a ticket, and the change slot gave him back his coin. Well, Greg, goodbye, Franz said as they moved toward the barrier. I'll see you in about 2 weeks. They're covering me down at the dormitory. Tell Sanger I'm on fire duty. What if you don't get back, Franz? Gregson asked. Suppose they take you off the sleeper. How can they? I've got my ticket. And if you do find free space, will you come back then? If I can. Franz patted Gregson on the shoulder reassuringly, waved, and disappeared among the commuters. He took the local suburban Green to the district junction in the next county. The Green Line train traveled at an interrupted 70 miles per hour, and the ride took 2.5 hours. At the junction, he changed to an express elevator, which got him up out of the sector in 90 minutes at 400 miles per hour. Another 50 minutes in a through-sector special brought him to the main line terminus, which served the Union. There he bought a coffee and gathered his determination together. Super sleepers ran east and west, halting at this and every 10th station. The next arrived in 72 hours' time, westbound. The mainline terminus was the largest station Franz had seen, a vast, mile-long cavern tiered up through 30 levels. Hundreds of elevator shafts sank into the station, and the maze of platforms, escalators, restaurants, hotels, and theaters seemed like an exaggerated replica of the city itself. Getting his bearings from one of the information booths, Franz made his way up an escalator to Tier 15, where the super sleepers berthed. Running the length of the station were 2 gigantic steel vacuum tunnels, each 200 feet in diameter, supported at 30-foot intervals by massive concrete buttresses. Franz walked slowly along the platform and stopped by the telescopic gangway that plunged into one of the airlocks. 270 degrees true, he thought, all the way, gazing up at the curving underbelly of the tunnel. It must come out somewhere. He had $45 in his pocket, sufficient coffee and sandwich money to last him 3 weeks. 6 if he needed it. Time anyway to find the city's end. He passed the next 3 days nursing coffees in any of the 30 cafeterias in the station, reading discarded newspapers and sleeping in the local red trains, which ran 4-hour journeys around the nearest sector. When at last the super sleeper came in, he joined the small group of fire police and municipal officials waiting by the gangway, and followed them into the train. There were 2 cars, a sleeper, which no one used, and a day coach. Franz took an inconspicuous corner seat near one of the indicator panels in the day coach, pulled out his notebook, and got ready to make his first entry. First day, west 270 degrees, Union 4,350. Coming out for a drink, a fire captain across the aisle asked. We have a 10-minute break here. No thanks, Franz said. I'll hold your seat for you. $5 a cubic foot. Free space, he knew, would bring the price down. There was no need to leave the train or make too many inquiries. All he had to do was borrow a paper and watch the market averages. Second day, west 270 degrees. Union 7,550. They're slowly cutting down on these sleepers, someone told him. Everyone sits in the day coach. Look at this one. Seats 60 and only 4 people in it. There's no need to move around. People are staying where they are. In a few years, there'll be nothing left but the suburban services. 97 cents. At an average of $1 a cubic foot, Franz calculated idly, it's so far worth about $4 times 10 to the 27th power. Going on to the next stop, are you? Well, goodbye, young fellow. Few of the passengers stayed on the sleeper for more than 3 or 4 hours. By the end of the second day, Franz's back and neck ached from the constant acceleration. He got a little exercise walking up and down the narrow corridor in the deserted sleeping coach, but had to spend most of his time strapped to his seat as the train began its long, braking runs into the next station. Third day, west 270 degrees, Federation 657. Interesting, but how could you demonstrate it? It's just an odd idea of mine, Franz said, screwing up the sketch and dropping it in the disposal chute. Hasn't any real application. Curious, but it rings a bell somewhere. Franz sat up. Do you mean you've seen machines like this? In a newspaper or a book? No, in a dream. Every half-day's run, the pilot signed the log. The crew handed it over to their opposites on an eastbound sleeper, crossed the platform, and started back for home. 125 cents. $8 times 10 to the 33rd power. Fourth day, west 270 degrees, Federation 1,255. $1 a cubic foot. You in the estate business? Starting up, Franz said easily. I'm hoping to open a new office of my own. He played cards, bought coffee and rolls from the dispenser in the washroom, watched the indicator panel, and listened to the talk around him. Believe me, a time will come when each union, each sector, almost I might say, each street and avenue will have achieved complete local independence, equipped with its own power services, aerators, reservoirs, farm laboratories. The car bore. $6 times 10 to the 75th power. Fifth day, west 270 degrees, 17th Greater Federation. At a kiosk on the station, Franz bought a clip of razor blades and glanced at the brochure put out by the local Chamber of Commerce. 12,000 levels, 98 cents a foot, unique elm drive, fire safety records unequaled. He went back to the train, shaved, and counted the $30 left. He was now 95 million great miles from the suburban station on 984th Street, and he knew he couldn't delay his return much longer. Next time, he'd save up a couple of thousand. $7 times 10 to the 127th power. Seventh day, west 270 degrees, 212th Metropolitan Empire. Franz peered at the indicator. Aren't we stopping here? He asked a man 3 seats away. I wanted to find out the market average. Varies. Anything from 50 cents a... 50? Franz shot back, jumping in. When's the next stop? I've got to get off here. Not here, son. He put out a restraining hand. This is Night Town. You in real estate? Franz nodded, holding himself back. I thought... Relax. He came and sat opposite Franz. It's just one big slum. Dead areas. In places it goes down as low as 5 cents. There are no services, no power. It took them 2 days to pass through. City authority are starting to seal it off, the man told him. Huge blocks. It's the only thing they can do. What happens to the people inside, I hate to think. He chewed on a sandwich. Strange, but there are a lot of these black areas. You don't hear about them, but they're growing. Starts in a back street in some ordinary dollar neighborhood. A bottleneck in the sewage disposal system, not enough ash cans, and before you know it, 1,000,000 cubic miles have gone back to the jungle. They try a relief scheme, pump in a little cyanide, and then brick it up. Once they do that, they're closed for good. Franz nodded, listening to the dull humming air. Eventually, there'll be nothing left but these black areas. The city will be one huge cemetery. What a thought. 10th day, east 90 degrees, 755th Greater Metropolitan. Wait! Franz leaped out of his seat and stared at the indicator panel. What's the matter? Someone opposite asked. East, Franz shouted. He banged the panel sharply with his hand, but the lights held. Has the train changed direction? No, it's eastbound, another of the passengers told him. Are you on the wrong train? It should be heading west, Franz insisted. It has been for the last 10 days. 10 days, the man exclaimed. Have you been on the sleeper for 10 days? Where the hell are you going? Franz went forward and grabbed the car attendant. Which way is this train going? West? The attendant shook his head. East, sir. It's always been going east. You're crazy, Franz snapped. I want to see the pilot's log. I'm afraid that isn't possible. May I see your ticket, sir? Listen, Franz said weakly, all the accumulated frustration of the last 20 years mounting inside him. I've been on this... He stopped and went back to his seat. The 5 other passengers watched him carefully. 10 days. One of them was still repeating in an awed voice. 2 minutes later, someone came and asked Franz for his ticket. And of course it was completely in order, the police surgeon commented. He walked over to M and swung the spot out of his eyes. Strangely enough, there's no regulation to prevent anyone else doing the same thing. I used to go for free rides myself when I was younger, though I never tried anything like your journey. He went back to the desk. We'll drop the charge, he said. You're not a vagrant in any indictable sense, and the transport authorities can do nothing against you. How this curvature was built into the system, they can't explain. Now, about yourself. Are you going to continue this search? I want to build a flying machine, M said carefully. There must be free space somewhere. I don't know. Perhaps on the lower levels. The surgeon stood up. I'll see the sergeant and get him to hand you over to one of our psychiatrists. He'll be able to help you with the dream. The surgeon hesitated before opening the door. Look, he began to explain sympathetically. You can't get out of time, can you? Subjectively, it's a plastic dimension, but whatever you do to yourself, you'll never be able to stop the clock. He pointed to the one on the desk. Or make it run backward. In exactly the same way, you can't get out of the city. The analogy doesn't hold, M said. He gestured at the walls around them and the lights in the street outside. All this was built by us. The question nobody can answer is, what was here before we built it? It's always been here, the surgeon said. Not these particular bricks and girders, but others before them. You accept that time has no beginning and no end. The city is as old as time and continuous with it. The first bricks were laid by someone, M insisted. There was the foundation. A myth. Only the scientists believe in that, and even they don't try to make too much sense of it. Most of them privately admit that the foundation stone is nothing more than a superstition. We pay it lip service out of convenience, and because it gives us a sense of tradition. Obviously, there can't have been a first brick. If there was, how can you explain who laid it? And even more difficult, where they came from. There must be free space somewhere, M said doggedly. The city must have bounds. Why? The surgeon asked. It can't be floating in the middle of nowhere. Or is that what you're trying to believe? M sank back limply. No. The surgeon watched M silently for a few minutes and paced back to the desk. This peculiar fixation of yours puzzles me. You're caught between what the psychiatrist calls paradoxical faces. I suppose you haven't misinterpreted something you've heard about the wall. M looked up. Which wall? The surgeon nodded to himself. Some advanced opinion maintains that there's a wall around the city, through which it's impossible to penetrate. I don't pretend to understand the theory myself. It's far too abstract and sophisticated. Anyway, I suspect they've confused this wall with the bricked up black areas you pass through on the sleeper. I prefer the accepted view that the city stretches out in all directions without limits. He went over to the door. Wait here, and I'll see about getting you a probationary release. Don't worry, the psychiatrists will straighten everything out for you. When the surgeon had left, M stared emptily at the floor, too exhausted to feel relieved. He stood up and stretched himself, walking unsteadily around the room. Outside, the last pilot lights were going out, and the patrolman on the catwalk under the roof was using his torch. A police car roared down one of the avenues crossing the street, its rails screaming. 3 lights snapped on along the street, and then one by one went off again. M wondered why Gregson hadn't come down to the station. Then the calendar on the desk riveted his attention. The date exposed on the flyleaf was the 12th of August. That was the day he started off on his journey. Exactly 3 weeks ago. Today. Take a westbound green to 298th Street, cross over at the intersection and get a red elevator up to level 237. Walk down to the station on Route 175, change to a 438 Suburban, and go down to 795th Street. Take a blue line to the plaza, get off at 4th and 275th, turn left at the roundabout, and you're back where you started from. $hell times 10 to the nth power.